Yo guys, what's going on? It is Specimen here, and we're looking at the SKELLIGE reveals today. All 4 are out. We also missed a couple of Nilfgaard cards, which we'll just check up on at the end. Neutral and Scoia'tael cards are going to be done at Gwent World Masters this weekend. Remember, if you want that free Ken Warham card back, I did upload a video detailing how you can get that, as well as how you can get your hands on free Meteorite Powder this weekend. Of course, if you're watching the event, you'll also get to see those reveals firsthand, but I'll be covering them on my channel as well. So make sure you're subscribed. If not, so close to 10,000. 4 SK cards, and they're all revolving around the Druid and Alchemy sort of feel, and I love that. Previously Alchemy cards, I've always felt like they're a little bit lacking. Things like Golden Froth, which is a neutral card, often see play only in Alchemy decks because it's just got the Alchemy tag. Similarly, just a lack of Druids to proc GEDYNEITH can feel a little bit awkward, but they've got some fantastic cards. The fact that Crow Mother synergizes so well with GEDYNEITH and the discard package, which has recently been catching buffs, I can definitely see this being some sort of competitive deck next season with a little bit of support. And the first card that was revealed, which is probably the most important one to talk about, is the new Alchemy card, which is a 4-provision common card called Tears of Siren. This is a card art that was revealed during the last Gwent Open, so it's a card art we've seen for a while, just hadn't known its ability. And it's going to spawn Rain on an enemy row for 2 turns, and then spawn a Deafening Siren on the opposite row. So you're going to get a Deafening Siren, which is a 2-strength beast, so some beast synergy potentially there, and you're going to spawn Rain for 2 turns. So Rain is a weather effect that is going to deal 1 damage to 2 units. So if there's 1 unit on your opponent's row, Rain is just going to deal 1 damage to that unit. If there's 2 units, Rain's going to deal 1 damage to both of them. If there's 3, it's going to deal 1 damage to 2 of them at random. So of course that means it could hit things like armor. That's going to be the biggest sort of counter to Tears of Siren. But 6 points for 4 provisions with the Alchemy tag is pretty decent. Obviously Golden Froth has that same amount of numbers, so it's not like that spectacular when you compare it to Golden Froth, but hopefully the Rain's going to have some more advanced synergies. I think one thing in particular to bear in mind is Golden Froth can often reset damaged units, which is anti-synergistic with the Battle Trance ability. So Tears of Siren is going to work quite nicely at resetting some of your units without going into green strength as well, which means that you can hopefully get more value out of your passive ability. With Battle Trance, which is whenever you play a Alchemy card, you're going to heal one of your units. So Tears of Siren is the first Alchemy card. I think definitely needed some more 4-provision Alchemy cards. I think one that spawns Rain is interesting as well, because there's potential synergies with Bloodthirst, and Dagar as well is definitely something that comes to mind, as well as actually Rain proving to be synergistic with some of the other cards. I'm going to look at the Cultist next, which is certainly the weakest of the 4 cards. Not going to talk about this one too much because I don't see it seeing play. I think honestly it could probably do with being tweaked before release, because I just don't think it's going to see much play at all. I'm not a believer in this one. It's a 3 power 5-provision card. It also has 1 armor. It does have the Druid tag as well, so it's going to proc GEDYNEITH, which is quite relevant because there's not a lot of very good Druids. Certainly 4-provision Druids, I don't believe there's a single one. So it would have been nice, honestly, to have seen a 4-provision Druid, I think, just because it would add something a little bit more different to this Druid archetype. And it has got an order, so no deploy, spawn Rain for 2 turns on an enemy row. So in other words, Tears of Siren is going to be a 2-strength card, which is getting 2 turns of Rain on deploy, whereas the Cultist is a 3-strength 1 armor card, which is spawning Rain on order. So not guaranteed. This could be removed by natural selection and you're not going to get the Rain, but it also has the added ability of, at the end of your turn, if there is Rain on the opposite row, boost the unit to the right by 1, so working very similar to a Temerian Drummer. If there's Storm on the opposite row, boost adjacent units by 1 instead. So if there's Storm on the opposite row, it's going to work as an Anna. So it's like a budget Anna / Drummer. I think it's much more reasonable to compare it to a Drummer, with obviously the upside of potentially being an Anna. Having said that, if it isn't removed, it's also going to play for a lot more value than a Drummer would, because you do get the Rain, which is going to be 4 extra points. But of course, you're going to spawn Rain ideally on the opposite row, and then there's ways of transforming Rain into Storm with this Fulmer card, which we'll talk about in just a second. So you could get Anna type tendencies. Now, if this was the kind of card in NR, you'd be like, yeah, this is much better than Drummer. Honestly, Drummers are slightly power crept, and even with Trident Infantries, which has fantastic synergy with Drummers, they're not a very common card you see in Northern Realms. Trident Infantries are the card that whenever they're boosted, they deal 1 random damage. as well as boost and NR just seeming to be worth a little bit more, whether it's keeping cards alive, thinning your done banners, all those sorts of things, even playing for Scytheman value. Boost, just generally speaking, has a lot more synergies in Northern Realms. In Skellige, like, what are you really wanting to boost? There's not really too much that comes to mind. Maybe your defender you might want to boost, something like that. Seems like a little bit of a stretch. The problem with this card is if it's removed, it's just really playing for very, very little value indeed. And even if it sticks, the ceiling on it isn't exactly that high. Okay, it could be a great card, but I feel like often in this sort of 5 provision range, you kind of just want point slammy cards or engines that are really, really, really good. This was a 4 provision card, maybe with like slightly lower ceiling. I feel like it would be a much better inclusion. If this card is removed for 5 provision zone, it just plays for 4 points, you're going to feel quite sad. It's not like it boosts itself and makes it more difficult to remove. It's boosting another card. You can't really play it proactively either because you would miss out on the boost. So, yeah, and also like you actually need rain for this even to get the boost. Otherwise, it's just going to come in as a 3 for 5. So, not really a big believer of the Melusine Cultist. Definitely think it could do with a little bit of a tweak before release, because I think it's quite difficult to justify playing this card over things such as Fabula Priests, for example. If it was 4 provisions and maybe slightly weaker, I think then you could really begin to justify it because it's quite unique in the sense that it will be a 4 provision druid. And yeah, you just don't really have those options. And a lot of the times in these druid GEDYNEITH decks, you do end up having a lot of 5 provision cards. So I feel like if this was a 4p card, I would be much more on board. Not really a massive fan of this one. The ability is very interesting for sure, but certainly not like the most Skellige feeling card in terms of like the boost. But a really cool design nonetheless. Again, just kind of wish it was 4 provisions. I feel like it would be in many more decks at that kind of a provision cost. Hey, up next, Bride of the Sea. She is a human cultist druid. Again, going to be proccing our GEDYNEITH, of course. 4 power, 8 provisions. She has a deploy effect, which is play an alchemy card from your graveyard with provision cost 4 or less. However, you can increase the cost by the total duration of rain and storm on your opponent's side. Okay, so for example, Bride of the Sea, without any other synergies, could play a Tears of Siren or a Golden Froth, or of course a Rhizome, all of which are worth 6 points, but 7 points if you do get the Battle Trance heal. So therefore, if we call them 7 points, Bride of Sea is just going to be an 11 for 8 with the Druid tag. That's already pretty good, honestly. And of course, there might be some other rain synergies. We've already seen the Cultist here having that rain synergy. So if you take a Tears of Siren, might be even more than that with other synergies. And of course, there might be other cards revealed. I'm sure there will be. We're going to have 8 other cards in this expansion with the future set. So that Bride of Sea starts off at that sort of 11 for 8 range with the Druid tag is really good. But of course, you've also got this extra thing where you're going to be able to get access to other alchemy cards with rain. I think the main ones, well, Mardrome's a 5 provision alchemy card. Probably not going to be your top pick because Mardrome, a little bit lackluster, 6 points, quite similar to what Tears of Siren, for example, is going to be getting. But in its 6 provisions, you've got Priestess of Freya, which is great on a Bear Witcher. Also, even in some situations, you might want to do a Priestess on a Scald. That's quite a cute idea that you can do sometimes to thin a Skirmisher or something like that. Bear in mind as well, Crow Mother is going to be potentially extra points onto this Bride of the Sea as like a finisher in round 3. She's going to be +4. But yeah, I think Decoction as well is the other one that stands out. Ability to use Decoction twice in one game is going to be great in some matchups. For example, imagine you're playing against Keltalis. In round 1, you Decoction their Beast, and then in round 3, you play Bride of the Sea to Decoction their Phantom, for example. Something like that could be really, really nice. So really interesting to see Bride of the Sea. I love the design of this card. A flexible card that's going to be different depending on the alchemy cards you've played already in the game, and also the amount of rain that you can generate. There's going to be potential as well to even pull high-end alchemy cards such as Sigdriff is right with this. I was just in Trinet stream asking him about this, and he said if you're using Rage of the Sea, there's definitely the potential to pull Sigdriff with Bride of the Sea, and that's potentially huge. You can get things like Defender, even like a Crack-on Crate, probably not, but Dire Bear, Draco Turtle, these sorts of things often have amazing ways of being played with Sigdriff. And Sigdriff is a very powerful card being able to play Defender twice, but with this, potentially you could play Defender into all 3 rounds. So definitely the potential for some fun deck building decks. Maybe that's not the most competitive way to play this card. Maybe you're just going to play it as a more mid-rangey card. But I love this card. It's got the potential of just being solid in a competitive list. And also, you can build some really fun decks around this card as well with that triple Sigdriffer. Double Sigdriffer, meaning triple Defender or triple Turtle. I think sounds like a lot of fun. So yeah, Bride of the Sea. Big fan of this card for sure. Certainly, last but not least, we have Forma, the legendary card, a human cultist and a druid as well. So another card that's going to be proccing our GEDYNEITH. And having a 12 provision card that procs GEDYNEITH is really important. If you look at a scenario like Siege, it really struggles in having good high-end cards to proc it. You've got the War Elephant, which is kind of a little bit dodgy, whereas you look at cards like Masquerade Ball, and you've got some amazing ways of proccing Masquerade Ball, such as Usurper, previously Joachim and Roderick with Coup as well. Of course, that doesn't happen anymore, but that just shows you the power of being able to proc scenarios with these high-end gold cards, because it means you don't have to keep 2 bronze cards in hand. And Forma having the Druid tag is going to mean that Gedy is looking a lot more tempting to just slot in to some decks without necessarily building around it completely. Having said that, I think the most important thing of this is it's a 12 provision mid-rangey Skellige card. If you look at a deck like Reckless Flurry, which I've uploaded on my channel recently, a lot of the gold cards you end up with in competitive Skellige lists are around that 10 provision range. Cards like Totem, even cards like Morkvarg and Turgvi, you just generally don't include many cards above. The only ones you have are cards such as Lippy, Ceres, which are very deck specific. You've got cards such as Hemdall and Wild Boar, which again are quite meta and deck specific. You don't really have any mid-rangey cards you can just slot in for value. Cards like Einsace that other factions have, etc. Usurper, you name it, sort of these mid-rangey golds. But Forma certainly does that. On deploy, it's going to spawn and play Tears of Siren. So Tears of Siren, of course, this 7-point card potentially in Battle Trance, 6 points if not. So let's just call it 7, because I think the most likely, the odds are you're going to be playing Forma in a Battle Trance deck, but you might also just slot him in. But he's certainly going to be best in Battle Trance because of the passive. So 13 points on deploy with Alchemy Synergy is pretty good. Crow Mother as well. Remember, this is going to be pulling. Also, it's going to be proccing your GEDYNEITH. So all sorts of cool things going on. And just a 13-point play as well. However, it also has this Order ability, which is going to replace Rain on an enemy row with Storm of the same duration. So let's say, for example, you have 3 turns of Rain in one of your opponent's rows. You can then use the Order of Forma, because bear in mind, you could play the Tears of Siren, the Rain's going to proc, and then it comes to your next turn, and you could play Tears of Siren again with your Forma or with your Bride of the Sea, meaning there's then going to be 3 turns of Rain. You can then use this Order and replace that Rain with Storm. Storm, instead of the Rain, which is damaging 2 units by 1, is going to damage the whole enemy row by 1. So if you've got a full row, that is going to be 7 extra points per turn of Storm. Of course, Armor, again, is going to eat this, but this has got some amazing synergy with Dagar in particular as a card that comes to mind. And Dagar is just another one of those cards that you might want to play off Sigdriffer. So I can certainly see the potential of going all in with this Dagar and Rain/Storm synergy with Bride of the Sea, Defender, Sigdriffer. I think that's a really interesting idea to explore. Forma, again, also just has the potential of just being a mid-rangey point slam card in Skellige, and I think that's something Skellige decks have really craved for quite a long time. Even in Lippy decks, for example, just a high-end card that you could play twice. I could see Forma being decent. Yeah, really excited to use this card. I think it's a really solid card. So, Skellige set, how do we feel overall? I love Forma. I think it's a great card. I love the fact they've gone down the Druid motive as well. I actually love Tears of Siren as a cheap alchemy card. Okay, it's mainly maybe there just for the tag that Forma has as like as a card that Forma can play, but also the fact that it gives you an extra option of Bride of the Sea. I'm a massive fan. I really am. I think it's a really cool card. I think if you're playing Alchemy, it makes a lot of sense to include this card. And really looking forward to trying out the Alchemy archetype, particularly when they get a bit more love, a bit more support in the upcoming card drops. I wonder as well if we might see some of the existing cards buffed slightly. Mardrome, for example, I would love if it just got like an extra point. That would make Bride of the Sea even better and like maybe reward you for just having 1 turn of Rain, for example, in Bride of the Sea. That could be really cool. And again, I would love to see the Melusine Cultist given a little bit of love. I would, again... 4 provision Druid would be really cool, so I would love to see this maybe being reworked to be a 4 provision card. What do you guys think about the Skellige card set? Share your thoughts down below. Remember, Squirtle and the neutral cards. We only have 2 neutrals and 4 Squirtle, including Francesca. are going to be revealed during the Gwent Open this weekend. I beg your pardon, Gwent Masters. And finally, there were 2 Nilfgaard cards we did not actually mention. I already did my video talking about Blightmaker and Mage Assassin. Definitely the most powerful cards from the expansion we've seen, without a shadow of a doubt. Completely broken cards. Still no sign of these being tweaked. But we did get 2 other Nilfgaard cards. And I didn't do a separate video on these, mainly just because I've had a bit of a busy couple of days, really. Say busy, maybe lazy is a more fair way, but we can talk about them still. Dead Man's Tongue was revealed quite late on. This card is going to banish a card from your deck, then boost an allied unit by the card's provision cost. If the banished card was a bronze, banish another bronze card from your deck and boost the same unit by that card's provision cost. So Dead Man's Tongue, your main target is going to be 4 provision cards. You're going to banish a 4 provision card and then boost one of your units by 4. And then you're going to boost another 4 provision card and boost another one by 4. So this is basically an 8-point card that's sitting in your deck of 2 of your weakest cards. Really, really great ability. Big fan of this. If you compare this card to a Hunting Pack, for example, Hunting Pack is costing you an average of 5 provisions, playing for 8 points. So, okay, a Hunting Pack is probably doing a better job, but Hunting Pack only thins by 1, whereas Dead Man's Tongue is thinning by 2. Really love this card. I think it's really cool. Also important to remember that boosting cards could be pretty important in Nilfgaard, whether it's just boosting an engine out of removal range or something like that. Certainly isn't the most spectacular card, but I think it's just a really solid thinning card. Are you going to include this in all your Nilfgaard decks? I would imagine not. I would imagine this is mainly targeted at hyperthin, really opening up the door for hyperthin decks being able to thin 2 4 provision cards. It does, I believe, have to be units. No, it can be special cards as well. So something interesting about this is it could also help your Vigo, because you could just include 2 Tourney Jousts, for example, or 2 bombs, and then just get rid of them with Dead Man's Tongue. Therefore, rather than adding another unit, which makes your Vigo less consistent, you could just have bronze special targets for Dead Man's Tongue, improving the value on your Vigo. So I think this card's really cool. Love that they're pushing the hyperthin archetype. Certainly something I'm going to be experimenting with on day 1 of the patch. I honestly love the design of the Nilfgaard cards. Again, just wish the Blightmaker Mage Assassin combo wasn't as powerful as it was, because it's just going to be 2 auto-include, and it's inevitably going to get nerfed at some point. So I would just prefer for them to just release them as not being broken and tweak them slightly. Now, Riance is a card that lots of people have been saying is a bit of a meme card, and I have to say, I strongly disagree. I think Riance is a really cool card. You can look at Riance and compare it to a card like Former and think, okay, why would you ever use Riance? Like, how can you ever say Riance is better than Former? It's a provision more and it's way more awkward. Former's just this mid-rangey kind of card. Admittedly, it has the big benefit of synergizing with the scenario as well, which is very valuable. You look at a card like Vi. Vi, of course, while being great in its own right, the fact it synergizes with Haunt so well does just improve the power ceiling of the card for sure. If it didn't have a scenario, it wouldn't feel as good. And Riance doesn't have a scenario to synergize with. Former does, and Former's just much more of a mid-rangey card you could put into a lot of decks. Riance, if you're building a Nilfgaard deck and you've got 13 provisions spare, isn't a card you're going to pick, I agree. But what you can do is you can, for this 13 provision cost, build a whole deck around this card and get an insane payoff potentially. So Riance on deploy is going to look at the top 3 units of your deck, moving 1 to the graveyard and then destroy an enemy unit with power equal to that unit's power. So when I first saw this card, I thought it was like a mini Blaze of Glory. Like if you had Tibor on top, you could just deal 13 damage. Unfortunately, it's not like that. You actually have to have the exact same number of the unit you banish as the unit you're trying to remove, which can certainly be awkward, because let's say you've got a Tibor in your deck and you just want to remove a 4-strength unit, you wouldn't have that luxury. You would have to have exactly a 4-strength unit. However, there's lots of hidden synergies with this card, and it has an order ability to boot as well. The main synergy, I think, is using the Tactical Decision Leader ability, which, bear in mind, is going to be synergizing very nicely with the Mage Assassins also, and also got buffed recently. It's got synergy with cards like Snowdrop 2, and that means you could just put a card from your hand on top of your deck or on the top 3 units, and then use Riance, knowing exactly what you're going to find, moving that card to the graveyard, and getting the perfect amount of damage that you need. Added to that as well, Rico is a card that does now boost in your deck. Rico, kind of an underrated card. I've been wanting to slot that card into a few of my decks recently. and certainly Rico is going to be making sense. If your opponent plays an Egon, Rico is going to transform to a 13-point card, where you could then use Riance with him, particularly in Tactical Decision, to then put that card on the top 3 cards of your deck, and then bang, you've suddenly got Riance playing as a 5-point body with an Order removing a 13-point Egon. Very similar. Rico also works with cards like Gord as well. So if your opponent plays Gord and it's 14 points, Rico is going to transform to 14 points now as well, meaning that your Riance again could just clean up this Gord. So Riance plus Rico seems like a great combo. I really do love Rico as a card, so I think that's really cool. But what's his Order ability? Well, it's set the power of a unit to match the number of cards in your deck. 2 key uses for this that I can think of. The first and most obvious, I think, is in a hyper-thin deck with cards like Dead Man's Ton, Blight Maker, Mage Assassin, where you can thin your deck maybe down to 1, maybe even down to 0 perfectly. You could then use this Order as just a delete that card from your opponent. So you would have Riance, who is going to come in as a removal tool. Then if you've got 1 or even 0, ideally, cards left in your deck, Riance is just going to set one of your opponent's cards to that. That's really cool. It's like another tool punish. It's like a double tool punish potentially, right? Like a double control tool. And the other way that I think a lot of people haven't realized you could use this card in is in a mill deck. Yeah, in a mill deck. How could you use this in a mill deck? Well, it's a 13 provision card. And okay, you're going to miss out on the deploy effect of this, Riance. But you could go Ilharaquox into Riance, which might sound kind of stupid. You're going to have an awful lot of cards in your deck at the start of the game. You would have 14, so you could then set the power of a unit, maybe just the Unicorn, and boost it by 10 points. You would set it to 14. Alternatively, you could then play a 1 strength unit and set that to 14. So there's a couple of things you could do with it. I think the Unicorn interaction is an interesting one. It might prove to be a little bit too clunky. 5 is obviously quite easy to remove. Shouldn't be too much of a challenge, but I thought I would worth mentioning it. Certainly think the main way you're going to be using this is in a hyper-thin deck, and I'm really excited to build some hyper-thin decks. Just that extra hyper-thin payoff I think is really cool, and I can't wait to get my hands on this, especially Tactical Decision receiving a lot of support with Mage Assassin, Blight Maker, and this Dead Man's Tongue just looks like a standout card in hyper-thin decks. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Again, if you want to see the card text, I usually read these, but I've kind of left it a little bit late. So if you want to read them in your own time, there will be a link in the description. Again, if you want to see how to get that Kaer Morhen card back, make sure you check out yesterday's upload. You can get it this weekend for free, as well as some Meteorite Powder by watching Gwent World Masters #1. Full details in the video. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.